Good afternoon. This video is all about various disaster perspective. To begin, I would like you to pause this video and draw an object which you think will symbolize your idea of what perspective is all about. So what is the object that you drew? Is it your eyes, a telescope, an eyeglasses, a mirror, a window? It could be anything which is related to vision or how we look at something. Maybe you were asking, what is the connection of perspective with disaster, or what is disaster perspective and why is it important? Basically, disaster perspective is all about how people look at disaster, or how do we perceive disasters, because how we perceive disaster or anything in general will affect how we react, how we respond to it. And for this session, we must be able, or at the end of the session, we must be able to answer the following. First, how do people from different walks of life view disasters? That's why I ask you to interview different people. Second, does disaster concern only few groups of people? Kumbaga, kung sino lang ba yung mga at risk, sila lang ba dapat yung maging concerned, maging aware about disaster, or since almost everyone naman can be affected by disaster, dapat lahat? And lastly, in disaster as a subject matter, or if we consider it as a subject matter, does it cover various areas of knowledge? Meaning to say, in order for us to understand disaster and its effects, do we need different information or knowledge from different areas of study, different sciences? There are different perspectives about disaster. It may be, or it can be socio-anthropological and cultural. It can also be economic and political. People from health sectors have their own perspective. And in terms of gender, we might have different perspective about it, as well as scientific, technological, and environmental. And we will examine each of this perspective as we go along with our discussion. So first, let's talk about health perspectives. So to help us, now let's use these two questions. Number one, what are the psychological effects of disasters? And second, how do disasters affect our health and our healthcare system? So if you are assigned to interview a guidance counselor, then you may check your notes about what the guidance counselor mentioned about this. Kung hindi naman, you may ask yourself, no, how do disasters affect our mental health, our behavior, the way we deal with people, the way we perform the activities of our daily living? I think if we talk about the psychological effects of disasters, most common, the most serious perhaps, is yung tinatawag natin na, sorry, post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's a condition, mainly anxiety, no, na-experience ng mga tao na yun nga, naka-experience ng isang something bad na experience, no? Whether abuse like rape, whether war, or including disaster. So yung symptoms niya, it can be as diverse as what you can see on our screen, no? Iba-iba yan. But basically, it will affect the way you perform your activities of daily living. Okay? So ako, meron akong parang personal na traumatic experience sa earthquake nung bata ako. No? I don't know if you are familiar with the July 1991 earthquake. No? During that time, parang 4 years old pa lang yata ako. And imagine, naiwan ako dun sa bahay nung nag-aalaga sa akin. Kasi parang lumabas yata sila saglit. No? Naiwan ako, may kasama akong matanda pero nasa taas siya natutulog. So nung nag-earthquake, yung kasi yung first time ko na naka-experience ng strong earthquake. So hindi ko alam yung nangyayari. Siyempre takot na takot ako. So naging very traumatic siya sa akin. No? Ilang days ako na parang hirap so makay sa mga tricycle, sa jeep kasi tinatakot ako ng mga kuya ko na lumilindol daw doon. No? And may iba pa siyang naging epekto sa akin hanggang sa lumaki ako. But eventually, with the help of your family, especially your parents, unti-unti mo siyang unti-unti ka naka-recover. Unti-unti mong na-overcome yung fear mo. Okay? How about the effects of disasters in our health and in our healthcare system? So, maganda na tingnan muna natin ano ba yung present condition ng ating healthcare system or yung situation before pandemic or before disaster. Maayos ba yung ating mga hospitals? Lalo na yung ating mga public hospitals, government hospitals. Yung ratio ba ng nurse to patient or doctor to patient is hindi masyadong malaki or I mean hindi ba ganun karami yung pasyente na kailangang i-treat ng ating mga doctor, kailangang i-address ang ating mga nurses or may mga public hospital na sa isang bed nag-share yung 2 or 3 patient or client. Kumusta yung mga hospital? Meron bang bawat hospital ang kanya-kanyang municipality at the secondary hospital man lang? Meron bang kahit tertiary hospital man lang sa bawat probinsya? Meron man lang bang health center sa bawat barangay? Or may mga tao na nagkakasakit, namamatay lang hindi na natitingnan ng doktor kasi sobrang layo nila sa hospital or kahit sa health center man lang? Kasi yung mga questions dito, makakatulong para mas maintindihan natin kung ano yung magiging impact ng disaster sa ating health and sa ating healthcare system. Kasi obviously yung disaster, it does not only cause death, injury, or illnesses, but it will add strain to what is already overburdened, overworked healthcare workers that we have. So imagine kung magkaroon ng katulad ngayong pandemic, di ba? Ano nangyari sa mga hospital? Lalo na doon sa mga nag-handle ng COVID patients, di ba? Mas lalong na-overworked yung ating mga nurses and even our doctors. Kaya ultimo sila nagkakasakit. May mga namatay na rin. No? So let's remember na hindi exempted ang mga hospitals, ang mga healthcare workers sa disaster. So pag nagkaroon ng disasters, mas mahihirapan silang mag-intervene or mag-provide ng assistance dun sa mga victims. Socio-cultural perspectives. So here, we will establish if disaster is more on natural or human-induced and what are the human activities that contribute to or worsens the occurrence of disasters. And I have an additional question. How does our cultural beliefs affect the way we perceive disasters? So yung mga naka-assign sa AP teachers, balikan niyo yung notes niyo. Ano yung nag-gather niyo na information? And kayo personally, ano yung paniniwala niyo? Is it more on natural causes or human activities contribute more to the occurrence of disasters? Kasi may isang anthropologist na si Anthony Oliver Smith na naniniwala siya na mas malamang yung contribution ng human activities over yung mga natural extremes or yung mga natural hazards. Naniniwala siya na yung disasters are brought about by social order and human environmental relations. Pag sinabing social order, ito yung way kung paano nagwo-work together yung mga components ng society to maintain the status quo. Ano yung mga components na yun? Social structures, social institutions, interaction, kasama na yung norms, beliefs, values, among many others. So kung titingnan natin yung definition natin ng disaster, it is something na nag-cause ng widespread disruption sa functioning ng society at the extent na hindi kayang mag-recover ng affected community using their own resources. So bakit ba tayo umaabot sa point na yon? Ano yung mga factors na magko-contribute? Does it have something to do with the number of people who are vulnerable? Let's say for example, sa mga city na let's say maraming mga informal settlers, maraming mga nakatira sa mga hazard-prone areas, and to think na yung kanilang socio-economic status hindi pa ganun kataas, no, kaganda, no. Lahat ng yun may contribution sa kung gaano magiging kalala yung epekto ng disasters and kung gaano sila mahihirapang mag-recover from it. And sa pagkakataong yon, yung mga bagay na yon, may kinalaman yung ginagawa natin or yung mga decision natin, particularly of our leaders. So siguro somehow ganun yung perspective ng anthropologist na si Anthony Oliver Smith. And because he believes that disasters are brought about mainly by human intervention, then of course, he also believes that we can do something to prevent, mitigate, and prepare for it in the future. How about the cultural factors? Paano ba makakaapekto yung ating mga paniniwala, ating karanasan, no? Sa kung paano natin harapin or tingnan yung disaster. So halimbawa, kung may isang grupo ng tao naniniwala na ang lindol, ang pagsabog ng bulkan ay parusa ng Diyos, parusa ng kanilang bathala, no? Paano nito maapektuhan ang kanilang preparation? Kasi paano ba natin hinaharap ang punishment? Remember, ang punishment is binibigay sa atin ng someone na may authority, na may power over us. So, habang binibigay sa atin yon, do we have the right to resent it, to control it, or to stop it? Probably not. So, kung ganito yung paniniwala mo na punishment yung disaster, sa tingin mo ba, may gagawin sila para paghandaan ito? And syempre, kung ganito yung paniniwala mo, ibig sabihin nun, you lack the information. And if you lack the information, if you lack the knowledge, then probably you don't know what to do to mitigate a certain hazard or disaster. Or kung halimbawa naman, naniniwala ka na ang disaster is a way of God to bring people together, paano naman yun makakaapekto sa way mo ng pag-perceive sa disaster? Will it make you participate more in terms of response? Maybe yes. How about political and economic perspective? How do disasters affect our economy? So this time, yung mga nag-interview naman sa mga businessman, yung makakatulong, no, or makakasagot nitong tanong na to. Okay? And an additional question again, how do our leaders influence our disaster readiness? So unahin natin yung sa economy. Sabi nila, disasters have negative impacts on financial and economic system, whether small scale or large scale man yan. It disrupt and slow down human activities that help generate economy kasi 'di ba kapag ka may malakas na bagyo, pwedeng ma-cancel yung work. 'Di ba? And pagka na-cancel yung work, no, madidelay yung processing, yung production, yung manufacturing, and even yung pag-deliver ng products and services, which will in turn interrupt progress in development. In addition, kung halimbawa nasira yung equipments, no, nasira yung mga facilities nila or yung building na ginagamit nila for their work, no, then it would probably affect their income, which in return will affect our economy. How do our leaders affect or influence our ability to be ready in times of disaster? Siguro pwede nating gamitin na comparison yung ginagawa or ginawa ng iba't ibang mayors or leaders as a response to COVID pandemic. Pwede nating i-recall yung mga napapanood natin sa TV, di ba? Ano-anong city ba yung parang nagkaroon agad sila ng maayos na way ng pag-monitor, pag-contact tracing, di ba? Pag-isolate. Sino-sino sa kanila yung parang naging fair and equal in terms of providing assistance and support. Naging maayos yung pag-handle or pagbibigay ng financial assistance, whether galing sa national government or additional nila. Okay? So doon pa lang makikita na natin yung epekto ng quality ng leadership and ng strength ng political will. Kasi according to experts, the way a community respond to disaster is an outcome of the quality of leadership and the strength of political will. And yung ability ng locality to battle disasters is a reflection of the strength and political will and degree of being well informed of the citizens and being upright and concerned of its leaders. Balikan natin yung example natin kanina. Kung may isang city na sobrang dami ng kanilang mga informal settlers, sobrang dami ng kanilang below the poverty line, kung sobrang dami ng community nila na nasa hazard-prone area, ano na lang ang mangyayari sa kanila pagdating ng hazard or pagdating ng disaster? Kung yung leader nila walang maayos na urban planning, walang maayos na relocation program for them, of course, they will have a hard time recovering from its effects. Remember that studies have shown that politics is deeply wedded or connected to both the impacts of a natural disaster and the subsequent delivery of humanitarian assistance. Also, political considerations before, during, and after a natural disaster can determine who is most at risk, who can intervene, what actions will be taken, and who will benefit from those actions. So meron kasi tayong tinatawag na vulnerability capacity assessment. So kung ginawa yun ng LGU, no, headed by their Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council or Office, no, pwede nilang ma-identify o sino-sino sa ating mga residents yung prone sa mga gantong hazards. Or in the other hand, how many of our population is yun nga, will have a hard time recovering kasi pagdating sa finances medyo hirap, no? And also, they can identify, sino sa mga citizens natin yung pwede nating maging volunteers, pwede nating i-train sa mga search and rescue operations. So these things are all indications of how our leaders and what kind of leadership they have impact the way we prepare for disasters, political and economic. How about in terms of gender and age perspective? How do disasters affect women and children? Kumbaga, at this point, we are establishing yung equality ng effects. So pwede nyong balikan yung result ng interview nyo with a single mother or a working mother, working moms, no? Para ma-realize nyo or ma-establish natin yung possible na indication or effect sa women as compared with men. Okay? Sa tingin nyo ba, equal lang? Kasi lahat naman tayo, wala namang exempted sa disaster. Or sa tingin nyo, for some reason, mas dehado yung women and children? And if they are, if you think they are, ano naman yung reason or factors for that? So disasters do not treat men, women, and children equally kasi disasters lower life expectancy of women more significantly than men. Pag sinabing life expectancy, kung parang ano yan, kung gaano katatagal, no? Hanggang 70 years old ba, 75, o hanggang mamaya ka na lang gabi. Hindi ka na magigising. Okay? And also, women and children are 14 times more likely to die in a disaster. So bakit kaya, class? Ano kaya nag-contribute dito? Does it have something to do with physical factors? Do you think women are physically born weaker than men? Or sa tingin nyo, hindi naman sir, equal na ngayon kung anong kaya ng boys, kaya rin ng girls? Or may kinalaman kaya dito yung parang societal roles ng women, lalo na sa Philippine setup? So tingnan natin yung kalagayan ngayon ng women, di ba? Nandun ba tayo sa part na women are domesticated, na parang sa bahay lang sila, bawal silang mag-work? Or hindi na sir, kasi mahirap yung buhay ngayon. Dapat si mother, si mommy, si daddy paras nag-work, no? Para mas ma-meet yung needs. At kung working na si mother, no? Kumusta yung role niya sa ibang bagay? Pag uwi ba ng bahay siya ay relax na? Or ang dami pa niyang kailangan gawin, ang dami pa niyang kailangan i-manage, ang dami pa niyang kailangan isipin? Kung ganun yung situation, how does it affect them? Will you consider them as more overworked than men? Do they have more burden than men? So yun yung mga bagay na pwede nating i-consider para masagot natin to. And lastly, children are more common victims of disaster. So I think very obvious naman yung reason for this. Siyempre, children, they lack the information, they lack the knowledge about why this is happening. And therefore, they may not be able to do or to know what to do in case of a certain disaster. Pag ba may bata dyan na let's say 6 years old pa lang, nag-earthquake, sa tingin nyo ba alam niya na dapat siyang mag-duck cover and hold? Alam niya na dapat magtago siya sa ilalim ng table? Or baka umiyak lang siya, tumakbo, tumalon, isigaw ang pangalan mo, tsareng. And syempre, di ba, kung halimbawa, maraming anak yung pamilya, no? Pagka ba bumaha, di ba, lahat ba yun may expect mo na maliligtas ng parents, no? So, children are more common victims of disasters. scientific, technological perspective. So according to the science teachers that you have interviewed, what is the role of science and technology in disaster readiness and risk reduction? I think the most important role of science is yung good understanding sa nature ng hazards, no? It will enable you, it will encourage people to take appropriate actions. Kasi 'di ba, kung alam mo kung bakit or paano nagkakaroon ng earthquake, kung alam mo kung saan yung mga areas na prone sa earthquakes and sa mga related na hazards dito, may idea ka na kung anong gagawin mo eh, kung anong dapat iwasan, kung ano yung necessary actions to lessen or to mitigate its effects. And yung technology naman, for me, yung application ng knowledge, importante yan sa pag-develop ng mga effective na warning system. Like yung, di ba, nakaka-receive tayo ng mga text messages mula sa ND, RRMC kapag kami lindol na malakas, pag may bagyo na paparating, di ba? And also, we need tools, we need equipments, we need technology to be able to monitor. Oh, nasan na yung namumuong LPA? Nag-enter na ba siya ng PAR or hindi pa? Anong direction yung ite-take niya? Gaano siya kalakas? So dun pumapasok yung role ng technology and science, which is also very important. And lastly, how do environment contribute to the magnitude and severity of disaster? Kumbaga, hindi lang kung ano yung epekto ng disaster sa environment, kundi paano din nakaka-apekto ang environmental conditions kung gaano kalala yung magiging effect ng disaster. I think it's pretty obvious that hazards are expressions of the Earth's physical processes. Just like how earthquake is an expression of physical processes, particularly plate tectonics. However, human activities have an impact on the timing, magnitude, and frequency of these physical processes. Kumbaga, we all know that typhoon and flooding is natural cause. However, there are things that we do or we don't do, or we lack on it, that will contribute on the severity and magnitude of that particular hazard or disaster. And we all know that human endeavors have triggered global warming and thereby affected the frequency and intensity of extreme climate events. We have mentioned this so many times in earth science, so I don't need any further explanation about this matter. So our ecological conditions not only modify the frequency and magnitude of hazard events, but also affect natural barriers that can moderate the impacts of a disaster and protect communities. So halimbawa, yung mga wetland ecosystems, parang nagsiserve siya as a natural sponge na dinidelay yung pag-release sa mga surface water, flooding, ganyan, snow melt. Kasi syempre, pagka mas abrupt yung pag-increase, let's say, ng water level ng isang bodies of water, for sure, mas mahihirapan yung surrounding community or yung nearby community to save themselves. And yung mangroves, di ba? Isa din yung importanteng barrier. Like nung time ng Yolanda, merong certain community or area or barangay na parang isa sila sa pirang hindi masyado naapektuhan kasi they are surrounded by by mangroves. So parang yun yung nag-serve na pillow na nag-block dun sa paparating na soccer ball. Kaya hindi natumba ang kanilang mga plastic bottles. Okay? So now that you are aware of the various perspectives about disasters, about how different people from different walks of life view disaster, I hope you were able to understand more about the effects of disasters. And to end, I would like you to reflect on this question. Ascendance for future engineers, NACs, no, scientists, architects, and allied medical professionals, what can you do to contribute in disaster risk reduction of our school or your community? I think hindi naman natin na kailangan maghintay ng 5 years, 6 years na maging professional kayo para magkaroon kayo ng contribution sa society in terms of disaster risk reduction. Even right now, you already have the power. You have the platform to do something. All you have to do is to take the initiative. So with that, thank you for listening. I hope you learned something new, something that you can use in your everyday lives and something that you can share with your family and friends. Kasi syempre, pag mas maraming equipped with the knowledge about disaster, mas malalesen natin yung mga effects and casualties.